in 13 months of starting, despite all the dot-com crashes, we were, cash flow positive, right? Any businessman has to take risks, right? Without risk, you can't do business.
Right.
The more transparent you are, the more the client trusts you. And once you build that trust, then you get repeat business. When you're trying to win your first large enterprise client, and you're a small company, they obviously think twice, right?
Hello and welcome to another fantastic episode of Pitch Cafe podcast. Today's podcast is like none other. I'm here today with a very distinguished person. I'm not calling him distinguished, but IIT Bombay and the Indus entrepreneur Thai community thinks he's distinguished because of his accomplishments, how he started from scratch as a data center entrepreneur and literally is a market leader in building the backbone of India's data center infrastructure. This is no small business to be in. It is challenging, it is tough, and for 20 plus years, he has spearheaded this vision and mission. Let us welcome and bring on Mr. Sharad Sanghi, who is currently the Managing Director and CEO of NTT India. But his startup was called Netmagic and was acquired by NTT, one of the largest cloud and infrastructure providers in the world. Sharad, welcome to Pitch Cafe podcast. It's truly a huge honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Vida.
Awesome. So Sharad, let's start with, about your journey at Netmagic and NTT. What was the motivation for you to start this journey? You were here in the United States, you're a graduate of Columbia, but you went back. Columbia is one of the finest institutions to be a part of. But you went back and you lived a dream and you're still living that dream. So what is this journey? How did it come to be?
Thank you. So, basically my motivation for going back from the US was my parents. So I wanted to be with them. I always knew I wanted to start a business. So whether I started it in the US or India, I figured it would be similar in terms of challenges. And so that's the reason I decided to go back. The timing was such. So I got into the internet backbone infrastructure space accidentally. I was at Columbia University doing my master's. I had a research assistantship from the computer science department for setting up Columbia's network. So working on a tool for doing network management across Columbia's infrastructure, including the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. And as part of that, there was an alum of Columbia by the name of Jordan Becker, who was recruiting people for the NSFNet deployment of the first large backbone of the internet. And he happened to, interview me and select me, and that's how I got into. So it was not really the undergrad and master's, which was in electrical engineering, but really the research assistantship that got me to where I am today. And the reason for coming back, as I said, was my parents. And in 1995 the government announced that they'll allow commercial internet to happen. That's when I literally, the announcement was made in August, and August 95 is when I moved back, because I'd gained that valuable experience in setting up and running backbones in the US. And I thought that this is something I could do in India and maybe make a business out of it. Of course, it took 3 years before I could actually do it, because from 95 to 98, private companies were not allowed to do this.
And there was a recession in the 98, right?
No, 98 was okay. 98 was still not bad to set up a company with a lot of venture capital. Venture capital had just started, making big investments. But the challenge really came in 2001 when the dot-com crash happened. But 98 was still fine. But from 95 to 98, I started consulting with companies like VSNL, which was the only monopoly internet service provider in the country. And that allowed me to get familiar with the ecosystem in India. And as a result, I could then, I knew how the entire system worked. Who are the key vendors, who are the key partners, who are the key service providers, and got familiarized with the environment, got familiarized with how to get approvals and stuff like that. There are licenses for things. So of course the internet license came about in 98 for private companies. But from 95 to 98, there were satellite licenses. There was even an email license, right? So just how the overall system works, how regulation works, etc. Who are the key system integrators, who are the key providers of various technology, and so that whole ecosystem, meeting the senior management of vendors like Cisco and Dell, and all the familiarization with the ecosystem really happened in those 3 years. And then in 98, I set up Netmagic and decided to take up a license myself to provide internet services. In 98 though, most companies were focusing on consumers. So they were looking at dial-up access, but nobody was really focusing on how can you make internet mission critical for business.
Yeah.
And in 1999, I met BV Jagdish at a Thai event in Delhi. And I was fascinated by what he had done for Exodus. And my vision was also to offer services for mission critical enterprises, right? I didn't want to just offer dial-up access, etc. So what could I do to enable businesses? And that's how I started Netmagic. And the BV decided to angel invest in our company. He became the chairman of the company till they exit.
Very nice.
And mentored us to really make the company big.
Fantastic. So, Sharad, when you're describing your journey, there's one thing I see, a parallel with all great companies that are built, whether it's US or India. Infosys came out of, this academic vision Narayan Murthy and Sudha Murthy had. They're out and out geeks. They have PhDs or they've come from Indian Institute of Science. So did Google. It came out of a PhD project. And your company, setting up the backbone for a country like India, almost. That's in a nutshell what you did. It's come from a research lab. It's come from academia. So you're a person who can take an academic vision and convert it into a commercial enterprise. Can we say that?
I think that's very kind of you to say that.
No, honestly.
I gained my experience in the US, right? Setting up this backbone infrastructure. And I applied that to India. So I think that's more...
Yeah, fantastic. And also BV is a person who built that, a very process-oriented business in United States. And he helped you mirror that.
So BV taught me, for example, what is product management.
Product management.
Yeah, and that was, you have to productize all the services that you offer.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very invaluable lesson because I think now it is much better in India, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, product management was a skill that was very, very deficient in the country.
Yeah.
And, now it's becoming much better. As more and more global companies outsourced to India. They put their technology backends in India. There are a lot of good product managers that are now coming up in India, and as they come and start their own companies, product management capabilities have really improved in India. But at that time, if it hadn't been for somebody like BV, we would have probably not been where we are today.
So Sharad, when you started, you were such a humble startup founder with a small team, and you have thousands of enterprise customers, such a high valuation startup. Netmagic was when it got acquired by NTT. What is this journey of scale? What are some of the thumb rules which made you successful? Like, what was your high growth handbook like? What are the things you lived by to build such an amazing organization?
So there were many lessons we learned. So first of all, we were lucky. So 2001, we started off with a disaster, right? The dot-com bust happened. Nobody wanted to touch or fund data centers. So some data centers failed in the US because the clients that the data centers had were mostly dot-coms, which went under.
Right.
And therefore the data centers, which had taken large debts to build themselves, when the clients folded, they could not pay back the loans and went under. But the data center business fundamentally is a very solid business because what you're doing is you are allowing the client to focus on their core competence and you're taking the entire IT infrastructure out and you're sharing the cost of the infrastructure, like the fiber, the power and the systems to back up for power, etc. with multiple clients. So there's a lot of economies of scale. Fundamentally, with a large data center, the overhead is distributed across clients. So we realized that fundamentally it's a strong business. And then when the entire cloud movement started, so I think we have Amazon to thank for, because when the cloud computing started, all the workloads started moving to data centers. People soon realized not only to cloud, so that is one, that happened a little later, but even clients realized that, we have expensive real estate, we have to focus on our own issues, let's just outsource this to somebody who understands this better, who can have, smart engineers round the clock managing our infrastructure, and we don't have to hire these skills ourselves, we can focus on our core competence. So that trend started happening. We fundamentally believed in the business. We knew that this is a solid, business because in 13 months of starting, despite all the dot-com crashes, we were, cash flow positive, right? And so we knew that the business is strong. Around 2006, 2007, the demand supply started in our favor. So there was more demand than supply, and that still continues till today. So we are growing at a phenomenal rate. Our CAGR over the last 5 years is over 40%. But in terms of lessons, coming back to your question, I think I answered your second part first, but in terms of lessons, I think so obviously self-belief and passion, right? You need to believe in the business. Otherwise, if we didn't have that, then in 2001, we may have just given up, right? We were literally down to 19 lakhs in the bank. In terms of dollars, it's about $20,000 in the bank, right?
Gosh.
And this is a capital intensive business, but we turned the corner, started focusing on value added services. So one is self-belief. Second is, empathy towards all the stakeholders. So including employees, your clients and your shareholders. So as far as clients are concerned, we had clients like India Infoline, which is one of our largest clients today. In that 2001 period, they were also having difficulty to survive. And we gave them credit, and we restructured their contract, and now they're one of our largest clients. And Nirmal Jain, the CEO, is now he runs a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. It's one of the success stories from Bombay. Then, of course, to scale, you can't do everything yourself, right? You need to collaborate.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of partnerships we did. For example, we partnered with Netscaler and we offered load balancing as a service, right? Now this is we are not going to sit and invent that. We partnered with cybersecurity startups to offer a complete managed detection and response service, right? It's impossible for us to have done everything for each of these areas on our own, but at the same time, that was something that was required. Like, for example, our banking clients were requiring it, and by partnering, we could scale that much faster. The agility is key. I would actually echo Sunil Mittal. I attended one of his talks where he said, being perfectionist sometimes can come in the way of agility. You don't want to do everything so perfect that by the time you take the decision, now, for example, when I'm procuring hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment for my data centers, we could go down and negotiate to the last penny. But if we take like 6 months to negotiate, you're going to miss the boat, right? And your competition is going to steal the show. So agility is very key. Yeah. Another thing is, think long term, right? So many times people take decisions where they take a short-term decision, right? They take something, I'm getting this business, but they don't think what the long-term consequences are. We always thought long-term, and so that helped us scale the business in the long run, right? The key is your people, right? And so be people-centric, recognize their strengths, delegate to them, hire people smarter than you so that they can help you scale the business. You micromanage, you try to do everything yourself, you become the bottleneck and you can't scale. So these are some of the lessons that I would like to share that helped us scale from, small. Our first data center was just 3,000 square foot, and now we have more than 2.5 million square foot in production, and another 2.5 million square foot coming live in the next 12 months.
Fantastic. I love this concept. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. So I've seen so many smart perfectionist startup founders fall off because they could not delegate such an important task, and they didn't take care of the stakeholders. So you've checked all the marks. What is your take on risk? How do you take risks? Seems like you took a lot of risks. Partnering with someone is not easy. There is cultural integration issues. There's so many issues.
My take on risk is, look at the upside and downside. Any businessman has to take risks, right? Without risk, you can't do business. But look at the upside and downside. If the upside is huge and the downside is limited, I would take the risk without any problem, right? But where the downside is huge and could kill your business, you need to think twice. And I've seen cases where, people have actually, with a very high downside but a very low upside, right? And it could be, for example, I know of people who've compromised ethics to win a small business by taking care of some client. That, in my opinion, is where the downside is huge. If you get caught, or this practice will definitely have consequences down the line. And what did you gain? You got a small piece of business, and it could actually, that may not be the most appropriate example, but I'm just saying that there are cases where people look at, don't evaluate the upside and downside and take risk, and then can't recover back if it goes wrong.
Looks like for you, in all this, culture and ethics is the fabric.
Yes,
you seem to be living by it, going by your examples.
Absolutely. Never compromise the core ethics and values. Another thing, transparency is very important.
Transparency.
So in terms of our clients, things do go wrong. And I won't name the service provider, but we buy fiber from multiple service providers. There's one particular service provider, whenever there's any problem, it's almost like a recorded message, multiple fiber cuts. Right? They don't tell you what exactly happened. And so we obviously do less, we don't trust them, so we don't do as much business with them. But in our case, we tell the client exactly what has happened. If there's a problem that, let's say our engineer has done a human error, we will admit it. And so that, the client has faith. We don't shy away from admitting mistakes. Obviously, we want to minimize them. We don't want to have the same mistake happening more than once. But the more transparent you are, the more the client trusts you. And once you build that trust, then you get repeat business.
During that phase, it is difficult to face the music, but then once you do it, you build solid trust.
You know, it's funny, my wife always says that so she sees me when there's a problem and, let's say something has gone down and, obviously a client is impacted. And what I do is I go and meet the client, and invariably after that meeting, I've come up with more business. Because what happens is, for example, the client realizes, for example, let's say there's been a security attack and the client didn't have enough security measures. So we will first go and explain what has happened, and we'll say, look, if this was there, without trying to sell. And the intent is not to try and make money from a client's misfortune. That has never been the intent. But when you go and present to the client what exactly happened, invariably the client will say, okay, we trust you, please go and implement these measures. So she always jokes with me that
you'll come back with more. No. Absolutely. Wonderful. So much to learn from your experience of scaling your startup from a small company to such a large, huge organization. And now, what was it like merging with NTT? What are some of the memorable milestones with NTT?
So I'll tell you first why we selected NTT. So what happened was, in around 2011, there was a lot of M&A in our sector, right? So Verizon acquired Terremark, Equinix acquired a company in Brazil, there's a company in China, 21 Vianet went public, and if you look at the high growth countries, at that time it was the BRIC countries. So India was obviously, Brazil, I think R was probably Russia, India and China. Russia was probably not as in vogue, so it was more Brazil, India and China. So when there was M&A and liquidity events in Brazil and China, people obviously started looking at India, which is the next hot market, and India was, just started taking off. And so many people started looking at India. Now, if you look in the Indian landscape, amongst the data center providers, they were all large players. There was the Tata, Reliance, Airtel, and there was SIFI that had already gone public, and then there was us. There was nobody else, right? So everybody started looking at us. And suddenly we started getting inquiries from lot of players. KDDI looked at us, NTT looked at us, some US players, some famous US players looked at us. And I went to the board and said, look, I'm getting a lot of interest, what do I do? Because we were preparing to take the company public. So we had started building the team so that the company is doing well. We were thinking maybe in the next 3-4 years we'll take the company public, so let's start building the company in that way. And suddenly we started getting all this interest. So the board basically said that, look, if you can get the value that you would get while going public without the stress of going public, then why not? But I just didn't have time to meet so many people because I was trying to build the business. So we hired an investment banker to run the process. It was Credit Suisse, and they did a great job. And they ran the process. So finally, I won't name all the players, but basically there was a US company and there was a Japanese company that were the finalists amongst the 10 or 11 companies that showed interest. And we went with NTT for the simple reason that they were both willing to match the valuation, so that was not an issue. But we went with NTT because we love the Japanese culture. They're not the hire and fire kind. They were very, very accommodative. They were very appreciative of what we had done. And we felt that by talking to them, it was very similar culture. One of my concerns was towards my employees that, if we were to get acquired, how would the employees be treated? And I just felt more comfortable. I'm not saying that the US company wouldn't have treated the employees well. I'm just saying that we just felt very comfortable. And there were many reasons why we did this. One, obviously we get a strong parent. Initially when I started, I forgot to mention when you talked about scale, when you're trying to win your first large enterprise client and you're a small company, they obviously think twice, right? Because they're going to put their future on your data center, and if you go under, then what happens to them, right? So it took a while for us before we started breaking into large clients. We were doing really well with internet-centric or cloud-native companies as they're called today. It took us a while before we broke into large clients. So one of the reasons we agreed to get acquired by NTT was that they become a very strong parent for us. So we get that benefit. They looked at us and said, look, these guys not only have data center skills, but also have managed services skills, cloud skills. So they wanted to take some of our managed services and use that for across the world, which we did. We wanted to also use the best practices that they do for data center design into India. It was a win-win for both. And my investors were happy to exit because they were getting like a very good return. But in my case, I wanted to still build the business further. And one of the things I saw was that, look, I get an opportunity now not only to do something in India, but also across the world.
And last year, I was made the head of the data center business across the world. So that's given me a great opportunity. Also, some of our managed services that we developed in India are now deployed across the world. So it really worked out. And one of the best things about the Japanese culture is, that they're people of their word.
Mm.
So there were things that they said, and they may not have written in the contract, but they always honored it. Right?
Wow.
And they're very patient.
They're hardworking.
Very hardworking, very patient, very quality conscious.
Yeah.
All these are great qualities. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, always been amazed by Japanese architectural wonders. They're just so ahead.
Yeah, and of course, being in India, Japan and India have a great relationship.
Yeah.
And that also helps, right?
Yeah. So, as you were taking me through this amazing journey, you're probably one of the few people who have seen such a unique ecosystem, startup merging with a larger corporation, and then you go there and you build that business. You've kind of lost your own identity, but you're merged with much bigger identity. This is amazing, this experience. What was it like for you to grow your own startup from 0 to 10 million? And then now you join this bigger company and now you're looking at 10 million to 100 million. So what was it like?
Numbers are order of magnitude higher, but so we grew our company to a pretty large scale before we got acquired.
Okay.
And then now it goes into the billions of dollars. But having said that, your question is valid. And it's a different experience. And the pros and cons of both pieces of the journey, right? As an entrepreneur, when you're in a small company, you can take a lot of chances. You don't have to follow. Processes are good.
Yeah.
And nobody, but even BB believes that we need to have some process, and I agree with him. But obviously there's a lot of exception handling. Sometimes processes become bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And in large organizations, some of those things can bog you down.
Correct.
And and this is true for any large organization,
Absolutely.
not only. So I'm not picking on NTT or any other organization. However, I've always, one of the advantages in my case is, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I always considered it my company even after NTT acquired it.
Yeah.
I always treated it that way, and NTT allowed me to think that way and run that way. And so even if I didn't get approval, or if I had to go against the norm, I think I built enough faith and trust with them that I could just go to the top management and say, look, this is what needs to be done and I'm going to do it.
And so you're innovating.
Yeah.
You're still innovating because they're letting you do your thing.
Yeah, so they still innovate. And we built a lot of firsts in India. We were the first public cloud provider that we built the cloud from our own in India. I mean, there were obviously the large hyperscalers, they're much larger, but we built our own. We were the first ones to do, many firsts, like storage as a service, disaster recovery as a service, first data center to do the entire NDR suite of services for security. And so there were many firsts that we did out of India. We have a small 60-member team in Pune and a small team in Bombay, that basically came up with new services. Our sales team would sniff an opportunity, product managers would discuss with them, then give it to engineering, and then engineering team in Pune would actually come up with the service. And so we did that, and some of these services NTT is using, even in other parts of the world. You have to constantly innovate, otherwise, you become commodity.
Yeah, no, this is an amazing lesson. And what do you do to keep innovating now? Now that you've been there, done that, you've seen it all, what are you innovating about? What is your current?
So the last innovation, it's not that we invented it. So I'm not saying that when we do innovation, we necessarily invent something, but we deployed liquid immersion cooling.
Wow.
Because in Mumbai, the climate is very humid and hot. In data centers, the efficiency, there's a parameter called PUE, or power usage efficiency, that measures how energy efficient the data center is.
Yeah.
And typically in the US, you see data centers with PUEs of 1.2, 1.3.
Yeah.
India is more like 1.5, 1.6 because of the climate, right? And here people use the ambient temperature to do cooling, whereas you can't do that in India. So the typical PUEs that you see anywhere between 1.4 and 1.6. So we wanted to see how we could lower that PUE. So we collaborated with one of our clients, PhonePe, and with Dell and Vertiv. And we set up a 4.8 megawatt deployment for PhonePe using liquid immersion cooling.
Very nice.
Which is we immerse servers into a coolant liquid, and which has a high specific heat capacity. So you don't need chillers to cool the servers. So there's innovation that we've done there. We can introduce AI in operations. So we have AI ops. So a lot of the ticketing that, when there was an alert, something went down, suddenly hundreds of tickets would get generated. Now we've reduced the number of tickets. We've assigned automated routing of tickets to the agents. We've looked at how we can automatically close tickets. So a lot of innovation in these kind of areas. Also for our data center interconnect, kind of like what Equinix has done. where we enable through software-enabled cross connects and data center interconnects and connections to clouds.
Yeah.
So that's again helped our clients to. Then of course we have a hybrid multi-cloud portal which allows our clients to manage their infrastructure across multiple clouds through a single pane of glass. So these are the kind of things that we keep on doing. And the last one, as I said, was liquid immersion.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at quantum computers, if you're looking at any high performance computing, this technology is invaluable.
In fact, NTT Research has come up with this thing that they've launched. I know they're actually showcasing it in San Francisco today, called ION, which is an all-photonics network, which will drastically increase the capacity of compute storage and as well as throughput in networks by significantly reducing power consumption, 100x lower. Right?
Fantastic.
And so, of course, the vision is by 2030 they would like the internet to be revolutionized so that we deploy ion inside infrastructure. So it's all photonics and with very little power consumption. So I think NTT as an organization fundamentally believes in technology for good. And I think that's something that, hopefully, and sustainability is a important, very, very important thing. Talking even in boardrooms, all our clients insist to see what our vision. And we've announced for our global data center business that we will be carbon neutral by 2030.
Very nice. Amazing. So NTT has no stopping. Every other month, every other quarter, there's a new, milestone. What is your latest announcement? I heard a new data centers coming up in India. What is happening?
Many announcements. We're launching 6 data centers in the next 4 months. When we started, we could build 1 data center at a time. When in 2017 or 18, we built 2 together and we thought that was a huge task. Currently, we're constructing 9 data centers in parallel. 6 of these data centers are being launched between March and June. So that's going to be a huge thing for us.
So you're optimized.
And we figured out, how we can. We've obviously hired some good talent to scale and also optimize processes so that we could, do parallel construction. And of course, with NTT support because it requires a lot of funding for this. So, and more than 70 to 80% of this is pre-booked. So, it's not speculative builds. Right? It's a lot of demand. I was saying demand and supply in favor. We're also launching the MIST cable, which connects Malaysia, India, Singapore, and Thailand, which is why it's called MIST. And that's landed in India already, but it'll go live later this year. So these are 2 major, from a digital backbone perspective, these are 2 major announcements from us.
If you look at any developed country today, what it was 2 decades ago, it was all infrastructure work. It was busy with infrastructure building. That's what you're doing for India. So amazing.
The other thing we're doing also, just to add, is that we're building captive solar plants and hybrid solar plants. So almost already 100 megawatts is live, another 350 megawatts under construction.
So how does it tie with the NTT work?
So the way it works is our data centers consume a lot of energy. So we generate equivalent amount of renewable energy which we give to the grid so that we want to become carbon neutral.
Carbon neutral concept. Yeah. So, I want to keep talking about what you're doing at NTT, but let's come back to the entrepreneurship side. Obviously, when you're scaling this path, you've hired new people, you have merged with new businesses. You already mentioned why you preferred NTT as your partner. But, if you're building a team, like what kind of co-founder or team member would you choose? Like what were your thumb rules?
Simplest thing is, in the area that you're looking for someone, that person needs to be smarter than you.
Okay.
Obviously. So, like, for example, I was not an expert on product marketing, so I got a very good person who was good in product marketing. Similarly in sales, similarly in other areas. So that's one simple thing. Obviously, from a cultural perspective, when you speak, you need to share the same values. And that you can kind of tell when you speak to a person. We a lot of the people that we hire, it's a, informal conversation where you come to know the attitude, you come to know the values that the person cherishes, the culture that the person imbibes. And so that needs to have a set, right? And of course, it needs to be competent in his work. So, and I believe in delegation. If I didn't delegate, we couldn't have scaled.
Absolutely.
We had, as I said, parallelly right now I'm in the US and they're building 10 data centers in India in parallel. And it couldn't have happened if we didn't trust our people and delegate our responsibility. So a lot of our recruitment we do is through word of mouth because then you have some context to the person you're hiring.
Absolutely.
It works a lot. We've been also fortunate. We've got a team that The core team has stayed. One of my concerns was when NTT acquired us, that maybe many people could, but the core team has stood with us, all these years, even after the acquisition.
Yeah, so you vet people, even you said you took your time to vet your startup idea at Netmagic. So you take your time in vetting people or your idea. Yeah. So that's a great habit to have. So on that note, I would say a lot of these things apply to your choice of investors, because I work with many founders and they sometimes pick the wrong investor and their life is miserable. So I'm guessing the same kind of thumb rules apply there also.
When BB decided to invest, right, 5 or 6 or 7 different venture capitalists reached out to us and wanted us to take the money from them because they knew that BB had built, at that time I think Exodus was worth 25 billion or something like that.
Right.
And so they knew that, look, if BB is involved, there must be something these guys have. And so we went with people again that we were comfortable with. So we went with Nexus Ventures, and it was, at that time it was eVentures that then Nexus acquired them.
Right.
So it was two gentlemen by the name of Neeraj Bhargav and Sandeep Singhal, that we felt just comfortable, similar background, professional in the dealing. And also later we went with Fidelity, which is now called 8 Roads or something. So Raj Duggar from there. Again, very comfortable. I knew Raj, and we shared the similar beliefs. And I think each board member, we were very lucky. I would say our board, whether it was Jagdish as the chairman or Sandeep Singhal from Nexus or Raj Duggar and also Upal Basu from Nokia Ventures. Later, he joined the board later, but all these guys added a lot of value. You could bounce off ideas. So very often you're in a dilemma, you're not sure which way to go, whether you should invest more, the recession coming.
Yeah.
Should we still invest? Should we push back? But they kind of encourage us to invest. Sometimes there's a wrong senior person. Should you keep him? Should you give him a different role? Should you ask him to go? Those kind of decisions. Really, you could bounce off tough decisions that you could bounce off ideas and help me navigate some of those things. I was very lucky.
You're extremely humble, Sharad. I think you say you're lucky, but you're extremely humble and also very hardworking. So, on that note, this is an amazing conversation. I want to have it forever. Before I wrap up this conversation, there are a few things about current topics I want to pick your brain on, like a rapid fire. So, you must have heard about the Oscar wins. India won 2 Oscars. What are your thoughts on that?
I feel very proud. It's good to see India do well in many stages now. We used to do well. For a while, we've been doing well in cricket. We're doing well in films. We started doing slightly better in Olympics.
Yeah.
And so it's good to see India, shine.
Yeah.
Truly shine. Modi is now the leader. Prime Minister Modi is now the leader for the G20.
Yeah.
So it's just good to see India on the map.
Fantastic. On that note, India is leading the G20 this year. What is your take on that? What have you?
Again, very proud. There's, I think what Prime Minister Modi is doing is a fabulous job in 55 cities.
Yes.
He's got delegates visiting. The benefit for us living in those cities is that they've been beautified.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a great cross-cultural exchange, so people will, he's really put India on the map, right?
Yeah.
So, now you can proudly go anywhere.
They cleaned up Varanasi. I cannot.
Varanasi is being cleaned up.
It's such a big thing.
Mumbai.
Yes.
I live in Mumbai, and they've just beautified the thing. They've lit up, even the Sea Link and a lot of other places have been lit up so beautifully. And in the night, and they've painted out, most of the site. And I just hope they maintain it. That's just a fringe benefit. I think the cross-cultural exchange will truly showcase the talent and potential of India to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that hopefully will result in better relationships with other countries, better trade with other countries. So I think it's a very positive thing.
Fantastic. They say if you want to clean your house, call a guest. I guess that's what Modi is doing. And he's cleaning up all these cities. India needed that clean initiative. There's another question which is bothering me. The Silicon Valley Bank crash. You have your feet in multiple countries in the world. You're in Silicon Valley. You're in India. You're in Japan. You're in Southeast Asia. This whole bank crash, it sent shockwaves in the world. What is your take on that?
We had gone through something similar in India a couple of years back with the Yes Bank, where if there's a run on the banks, for whatever reason, right or wrong, right, it could cripple any bank.
Yeah.
Right. I think the government did the right thing, both in India. So in India also, while the shareholders of that bank may have lost money, but the depositors were protected.
Yeah.
I think in India, if I'm not mistaken, there were 2 bank runs that happened within 6 months of each other. I don't remember the other bank, but they kind of limited the amount of withdrawals that you could do per week till the bank stabilized, and now Yes Bank, then they raised over $1 billion, and they're now back in the feet, and now people have got back the faith. I think something similar would happen here. So it's funny when this literally happened over the weekend. I just landed in the US, and this happened. Everybody was talking about it, and I knew that they won't allow depositors to suffer.
Yeah.
Obviously, and they had to fire the CEO. Even in India, the CEO of Yes Bank was removed, and a new CEO came in who kind of stabilized the bank, and I think they'll do the same thing here. I think obviously from a startup perspective, don't put all your eggs, classic saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I would say now, don't put all your eggs in one bank, all your money in one bank.
Yeah.
Diversify it. And I'm glad that both in India as well as in the US, the government's protected the depositors.
Fantastic. So India as a country is shining culturally, in sports, in people skills, in infrastructure, thanks to people like you.
Ours is more digital. There are a lot of other people who have contributed on building stadiums or building roads and stuff like that.
So where do you see India at 2030? That's the wrap-up question.
So I think, I don't know what size the economy is. I think, people are saying anywhere from, how many $1 trillion economy. I think that's not important. I think India I think we are already, fifth largest or fourth largest economy. We'll definitely be in the top 3 by then. There's no question. I think currently US, China and India, right? If I'm not mistaken. I think India is in the top 5, but I think we will become number 3. We are very close to being number 3, if I'm not mistaken. I may have my facts wrong, so I apologize if that's the case. But
that's a reasonable vision.
Yeah, but I definitely think we'll be in the top 3 as far as, and we'll be a superpower. I think today, there was a brain drain during my time of people going. I think there'll be reverse people coming in. People who want to come to India to learn.
I see that. Definitely.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that happens.
Thanks to really humble and amazing and inspiring leaders like you, Sharad. It was a wonderful hour that I spent with you. A lot of lessons to take home for me and for the audience. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you.